this video I'm going to run through the setup of the Bifrost graph to show making of this animation using the MPM solver in Maya and Bifrost. If you want to know how I sort of got this character set up, I've done another video that sort of shows the setup of the character. But in this one I'll just be talking about sort of the Bifrost aspect of it. So what I'm doing in this scene is I've got the character running, and then at about, I think it's frame 33, it's going to be a bit slow, there we go, I animate him off, and this is at the point that the Bifrost MPM takes over, and then he will disappear, and we're just left with the Bifrost MPM, which then goes through the simulation. So I'm just going to talk about the few things that need to be done. The sort of main aspect of it. Let's have a look at the Bifrost graph. Right, so let's just hit L. Actually, do I need to hit L? Yeah, I'll hit L and just tidy it up and reset it around. So at the moment, let's get rid of these. Having a think. Still thinking. Right. So we've got simulate MPM. Into that is going a source for snow, a collider, and the MPM solver settings. Into the collider, I've got the plane, which sorry, I keep turning this off. The MPM collides with, like that, and that is set to. Let's make this full frame. That's set to absolute, it's on shell. The detail size, I'm wiring back out into an input. The same I'm doing with the detail size of the MPM solver, just so they're feeding in the same number into each of them. You just sort of drag those into an input and put them on there, and then they get exposed on the Bifrost graph under extra attributes. If you set this up, make sure you've paused the evaluation, because when you set it up, it defaults to 0, and if you put them both in and it tries to start evaluating the graph with 0 detail, it will probably crash your machine. So just make sure you've got, I usually just put a 1 in there to begin with, and then start dialing it down. So that's the collider. We've got the alembic cache, which has now disappeared, going into the MPM snow, and the only sort of slightly tricky thing to do here is getting the color of this shader to color the MPM, the snow. So it's a little bit of a workflow to do that, so I'll show you. So Bifrost doesn't take textures at the moment, it only takes vertex colors. So you've got to basically bake in the shader color into the vertexes of this mesh. If you look at the previous video, I show how I sort of bake out the texture, but in this video I'll just show you how we sort of bring that texture into Bifrost. So with the character selected, I'm just going to right click it, and I'm going to go paint, mesh, vertex colors, like that one. That brings up that, and we go to tool settings. We've got the paintbrush tool now. I might just get into perspective view. So I think the first thing I did was I cranked that up to white. I went to RGBA, and I just flooded it all to make sure everything had a colour in it, and that will make everything white. And then I go down to my attribute maps, go import, click on import, and I click on this baked out texture I've made earlier. I'll open that, I'll think about it for a bit, and then it puts it back in. So this is now, this isn't a shader anymore, these are vertex colors which we're seeing. So if we now go to mesh display under modeling, and we go to the color set editor where these vertex colors are stored, we have this sort of color set which is called color. When you make new color sets, you usually call them color set 1. I've renamed this to color because I think, I mean, I might not be correct here, and I'm not 100% sure it is, but I did read somewhere once that Bifrost will only take color values through MPM if they're called color. Could be wrong there, but I'm just sticking with that because that's what I read somewhere. So I've got a color set called color. I've got these vertex colors on the vertices, and I now just got to get them into Bifrost. So I make a, let's just make this full frame. I make a set property node like that, and I connect a value to the value node, and that value is a vector 4, just a single, not an array. And so now I've got values for my R, G, B, and my alpha. I put that to 1 just to make sure that it's all fine and solid. And then in my set property, I write color there, same as the color set, color, and I then output that into the set particle properties where I can set these extra properties on the snow. So now that I've done that, I've got the color, vertex color being applied to the MPM snow. So that's basically that for getting it in. At the moment I've cached it all out, so none of this is connected. So the next thing is, let's have a look at the general settings I've got. So solver settings, as we can see, I've got the important one is the detail size. That's how detailed your sim will be, and I've got that set to 0.009, and that's the same going for my collider in here. And I've left the scene scale at meters. My character, if I put the grid up, come out of the paint tool, let's just hide that. You can see he is, let's bring him back to the beginning. He's about, a unit here, grid unit is equal to a meter. He's probably about 2 meters high, so he's not massively out of the sort of human scale, so I just left it as it was. Where is the Bifrost graph? That's not it, let's close that. So left that at that, and everything else I think is at default. So the next big one is the snow. I'll just make a new MPM snow so we can compare. Source MPM. So this is the sort of default settings, and this is what I've changed. So the first thing is I've upped the number of particles per voxel, so I'll get more. Do that. I'll get more little MPM particles which I'm going to render out, and I don't have to up my detail resolution, and therefore get slower simulations. So I'm sort of balancing out a slightly low simulation with more particles. And I've made the particle size 0.3, whereas it's 1 by default, and so 8 particles per voxel. I've made them 24. And then as we go down, density is the same, viscosity is the same, volume preservation is the same, vibration speed I didn't change. So I've changed the friction. I've made it have slightly less internal friction between the particles, and I've lowered the cohesion so they don't want to stick together so much. But the big one is the initial firmness. I've made it quite firm, so I've made it 300. And the other thing I've done is I'm inheriting the velocity, but I'm also adding some velocity to it, initial speed of 1, going down in the Y and along forward in the Z, I think. Yep, so I'm basically pushing a sort of, giving it an initial velocity of going downwards. That's what gives us this sort of, that sort of kunk. So it sort of forces it down to hit the ground rather than continuing straight forward. And that's it, apart from when I start it. So I'm starting at a frame 33 and finishing at frame 33. And if I just pause this. So at frame 33, he's gone. Where is he? Disappears. There he is. So if I click back, it's going to be a bit slow, but that's, I might click forward. It's sort of when he hits the bottom of his jump, so that's sort of the force of the impact is at its most there. Then I animate him off, and this is where I then bring in the MPM to take over. Think about it for a bit. There we go. So that's now, it's not that one, it's this one, isn't it? That's now the MPM doing it. So that's all the sort of settings, and then obviously I put them all through the simulate MPM. I cached out the granular particles. I've got it on read mode now, so it won't update. Is that updating? Might be. Yeah, it's having a pause. Sorry, that. Just thinking about it. So, yep, granular particles into the file cache. That will be set to write. I write it out. I'm on read mode now. And then the final bit is that I have to be able to tell Arnold to render out these vertex colors. So, make a sign material node in. Let's graph network that. So in my hypershade, made a standard surface shader. Let's just do this. Sorry, minimize that. Let's unlock that. It's annoying when it does that. So made a standard surface shader, and I'm connecting this AI user data color. And this is a utility shader you'll find there at the bottom. This is how we tell Arnold to use the vertex colors. So I've plugged it into the base color and into the subsurface color. And you just have to give it this name here, which is obviously the name of the color set. Oops, I haven't got him selected anymore. Let's just select him. There, the color. So that's where we're getting our user data color. We write that in there. We plug those into the color, and I've done it into the subsurface color as well. And then that's how Arnold will know to render out these colors into this material. You need to basically drag. Sorry, let's do that properly. Middle mouse, drag him in. Just going to double that up now. Think about it. So drag him in, which I've already done already here. So it's thinking. And connect that to the surface material, and then connect the output geometry into your output. So, and then that will apply your vertex colors at render time in Arnold. I think that's about it. Anything else to say? No, I think that's it. Cheers.